Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson is with me now. Thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on.
So I guess I just kind of the obvious start here before we get into your campaign is some of the breaking news that everyone is following right now as it relates to this target letter that was sent to former President Trump in relation to his role on January 6th. He is obviously seen as the front runner right now on the GOP field. If you do something that would be very historic, defeat President Joe Biden on the Democratic side and run against Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, what would be your overall message to him?
Well, Donald Trump represents a view of the United States, which is very different than mine. Among other things, he pits people against each other. To me, the power of the United States is that out of many, we are one. So a lot of it has to do with the tenor of the presidency. I want to make people remember that none of us have ownership of this country. All of us have ownership of this country, and that no one has a monopoly on the truth. You know, President Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. But Trump tends to have a my way or the highway type of view of America, and he tends to project onto anyone who doesn't agree with him that we are an enemy of the people. And this is very dangerous. I think he has stimulated some of the worst aspects of the American consciousness. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, according to his allies, it was reported just yesterday that their plans for a second term, should he have a second term, has to do with the president taking over agencies and aspects of the U.S. government that currently the executive does not have the power to do. So I think that his politics is somewhat dangerous for this country. And I will present to the American people a very different kind of view, a country that belongs to all of our people, and particularly specific agenda items. I want universal health care that the former president, as well as the current president, do not stand for. I want tuition-free college at public colleges and universities, which neither of them stand for. I want free health care, free child care. I want paid family leave. I want a guaranteed living wage, and I want guaranteed housing. That's why I have a 21st century economic bill of rights. Whether it's my opposition to President Biden, during the primary, or my opposition to President Trump during the general. I represent a fundamental difference, and that is that I represent an economic new beginning, an economic U-turn that returns the major resources of this country back to the people to whom it rightfully belongs.
And so I guess picking up on that, a lot of Republicans and Democrats who are talking about the campaign, specifically people on the Democratic side of things, they are saying that by, multiple Democrats running for the nomination, it could make things, divisive, it could make things polarizing, and therefore increase the chances of the GOP being successful. Would you find any truth to any of those arguments?
No, that's their PR narrative. In 2016, there were a lot of Republicans running, and the Republican won. In 2020, there were a lot of Democrats running, and the Democrat won. So this is just a narrative concocted by the Biden administration and the DNC. That's all that is.
And so how do you overcome the odds? I mean, this hasn't been done in modern history where a incumbent president was primaried by someone that was then successful, that then went on to win the general election. But this time is different because not only are you primarying him, but he also has Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has a ridiculous amount of name recognition, given that he was a part of the Kennedy family for a long time. How do you overcome those odds?
And he's still a part of the Kennedy family, by the way. Of course, we don't
Sorry,
take
yes.
away from him. You know, what happened before has very little bearing on what is happening now. You know, Donald Trump was considered a long shot. Oh, it'll never happen in 2016. We're living at a time, not just in American politics, but I think in the world in which anything could happen. I think the American people are awakening on both left and right to the realization that political parties and their dominant themes should not dominate our politics. It should be whatever the people want. And I think that the American people also realize that the same old is not delivering on the promises of democracy for us. There's no appetite, or very little appetite in my country, for another Trump-Biden rematch. 2/3 of the American people have said that they would like to see someone other than the President Biden run again. So actually, Robert Kennedy and myself are actually speaking into an appetite among the American electorate to hear some options and not just the one that the DNC would sort of stick down our throat.
And many people right now, I think, would agree with the statement that the Democratic Party is a fairly big tent party. You have those people who, don't necessarily support the things that you were talking about, like universal health care, free child care, things like that. How do you help Democrats to adapt to some of those ideas, given that, again, the current president, who is seen as the leader of the Democratic Party in many respects, doesn't support it?
It's not a matter of convincing the people. The people are already convinced. The majority of Americans, both Democrat and Republican, already support universal health care. The majority of Americans, both Democrat and Republican, already support tuition-free college. The problem is not with the American people. The problem is with a political system that is so in the grip of corporate power in the United States that legislators do tend to serve the profit-making goals of their corporate donors than the expressed will of the American people. So the problem isn't the American people. They're already with me on this. The problem is a very sclerotic political system that does as much to suppress as to facilitate the expression of the will of the people.
I do want to ask you too, we're almost out of time here, but in terms of the Republicans and even some Democrats, to be frank with you, a lot of people are coming out and saying that President Biden shouldn't run again due to the age factor, the fact that he is the oldest president in American history. Does that concern you in any way? Do you see that as a factor that should bar someone from running again?
Well, there's a very simple way for the president to prove his mental agility, to prove that he's up to the job, to prove that he could take on Donald Trump in a debate, and that is to debate Robert Kennedy and myself. Real simple. We can handle this. We can see for ourselves whether or not the president would be up for this. Have him debate us, and I hope that he will.
And just before we conclude, last question here. If you do get that debate that you and RFK Jr. both are hoping for, what would you want to say to President Biden? You ran against him in 2020. Your messaging this time around is very much the same as it was in 2020. So what would be your overall message to the president?
A debate isn't about a message to the president. A debate is about a message to the American people. And what I would want to say to the American people is that their rage is legitimate, their frustration is legitimate, that our economy is rigged against 99% or at least 80% of the American people, and that it is time for an economic new beginning. And I look forward to a debate to have the opportunity to tell people what it would mean, how we would do this. How would we have an economic U-turn? How would we make a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy? How we would make a just transition from a war economy to a peace economy, and hopefully inspire people to know that we can do this. We just have to elect the right president.
Okay, we will leave it there. 2024 Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.